welcome. Today I have Matty Brollock with me for the weekly recap. Do you want to say hi?
Hey guys, what's going on? You have Matty Brollock here, the coach of the St. Louis Rams, filling in for my friend Dave. He will be gone for about 2 weeks, so for two of these, you'll have to put up with me.
I know we're just going to have to suffer so much until he can return. I'm very thankful for Matty to... What did I just say? I'm very thankful that he's stepped in to help me so that you don't have to listen to my voice for a good 30 minutes or so all on its own. But let's just jump right into the first of this week's games between the Portland Timbers and the Atlanta Braviaries. So, what do you think of the team matchup as the games were starting, Matty?
Well, I really love Togovar's team. Looking at Trev's team, if the Gardevoir is carrying the Shadow Ball, then he does not have. Then the Atlanta Braviaries do not have good switch-ins to this Mega Gardevoir, and I just think that Toka put a lot of pressure on Trev's team on both sides with powerful physical attackers like Scizor and Terrakion, as well as really great special attackers like Gardevoir. But Trev's a really, really scary team too, with Reuniclus that could easily be able to sweep Toge's team if he is not prepared for it, and just some all-around really solid Pokemon. I think the Blade can definitely put in some work this game if played well.
Yeah, I agree with the vast majority of that. I agree with all of it, in fact. I think both players prepared quite well this week. Both teams look fairly solid. They both have ways of dealing with each other's threats, but it's not a matchup win for either of them. They both got to actually play well in order to win, which is really good in my opinion. It's what I always look for in games like these.
Agreed.
So, jumping straight into the game, we see turn 1, Blissey versus Mega Gardevoir, and it takes a ton from Blissey with the Psyshock. It was a crit, which was really unfortunate, because that doesn't look like it would do it here without the crit. But, oh well, the Blissey does reveal Protect, meaning that it's probably a Wish Protect variant, as the Gardevoir reveals Encore, and that means that Blissey cannot stay in versus it. The Doublade does switch in as the Gardevoir goes for the Calm Mind, and now it's probable that the Gardevoir doesn't have Shadow Ball on this set.
Yep.
So he switches into his Garchomp, takes a ton from that Gyro Ball. As we see, he's actually running Sand Veil Garchomp as opposed to the Rough Skin ability, which I think was probably just a team building error.
Yep, I think so too.
Because I'm pretty sure that Trev doesn't have Hippowdon on his team.
Yep, he doesn't.
And obviously he's not brought Sand himself, so a little bit unfortunate there. It could have influenced the game, potentially. I don't think it ended up mattering that much, but oh well. So we then see the Togetic switch in on the Garchomp as it goes for the Earthquake, and then the Togetic hits the Zapdos on the switch in with an Air Slash. The Zapdos goes for Agility. I mean, this is really scary as it baton passes out into the Scizor on the Shaman, and Shaman goes for a Seed Flare and misses. Not that important, but the special defense drop might have mattered. The Scizor does go straight for the U-turn on the Doublade switch, does a measly 4% as the Garchomp does come back in. Now, Trev already went out into Togekiss already, and so he goes out into Shaman instead in case he had maybe an Iron Tail or something for the Garchomp, and hits Seed Flare this time on the Scizor, does a respectable 24%, admittedly on a crit, but he goes for it again, does 18%, and the Scizor goes for U-turn, and he switches out into his Terrakion. Because he does see leftovers, he knows that the Shaman is not going to outspeed it. He doubles back out into Scizor on the predicted switch out into Doublade. He actually catches the Blissey switch in, which just as a sack, which is kind of important considering that it means that the Blissey manages to kill the Scizor, because the Scizor isn't strong enough to take out a fully physically defensive Blissey from 40%. But the Gardevoir does come back in now, and he does end up killing the Blissey, which was just sacked off by Trev. The Blade can come in at this point and click Gyro Ball freely, especially given that he knows that the Garchomp is not Rocky Helmet. But he actually goes for Pursuit, trying to get some more damage on the Gardevoir in case something goes wrong later on and he doesn't have it healthy to check it. So he then sacks the Shaman on the Garchomp and goes out into his Togekiss, and Revenge kills it with a Dazzling Gleam. So at this point, it's a little bit scary because, of course, Togekiss is so annoying and so hard to play against due to the Serene Grace ability. He goes out into Cresselia and sets up a Calm Mind on the Reuniclus switch in, and that's I was actually messing up my turns there. So the Gardevoir does switch in on the Reuniclus, and then goes for Hyper Voice, I believe. No, he goes for Encore, my apologies, on the Doublade switch. And now he switches out into his Zapdos, getting whittled quite badly, and the Shadow Claw nearly takes it out, and the Shadow Sneak does manage to pick up the kill on Zapdos for the Doublade. Terrakion comes out now and goes for Earthquake on the Doublade. Doesn't do that much, and the Doublade manages to kill the Terrakion as well with a Gyro Ball. So now Gardevoir comes back out against the Doublade and goes for Hyper Voice, does 27%, leaving the Doublade at only 10%. But Gyro Ball does manage to crit the Gardevoir. The crit didn't matter, but it went down, and the Cresselia comes out and sets up a Calm Mind. And the rest of the game is rather long, so I'll just paraphrase it. It comes down to Cresselia and Reuniclus both setting up 2+6 on Calm Minds, and coming down to who can crit, because the Psyshock doesn't do enough. And in the end, Togevoir manages to win the 1v1 and sweep the remainder of Trev's team with Calm Mind Cresselia, the bloody duck. What did you think of this game, Matty?
I thought this was a fantastic game. You have two of, the best coaches in this league with fantastic teams really going at it and both playing pretty well. I think overall Toge might have had a bit of a better matchup, seeing as Trev was the one trying to make some more predictions here and there, like going for a double Seed Flare on the Scizor with Shaman, going for Pursuit on the Gardevoir. One thing I was a little confused with was why he didn't go for Shadow Sneak on the Mega Gardevoir, and he just went for Gyro Ball instead, because he kind of risked, a crit knocking him out or something like that instead of just going right for the Shadow Ball. Didn't really matter in the long run. I was just confused by that play a little bit. But at the end, Trev really did play it perfectly to the point where he got the end game down to a Reuniclus versus Cresselia Calm Mind War, and he could have won if he didn't get crit. I mean, I guess after that many turns, the chances were in Toge's favor to get a crit, but hey, I think Trev did play fantastically to the point where he was able to bring it down to just chance. So really credits to both coaches on their playing and preparing for this game.
A very narrow 1-0 win. I think that something that might be overlooked a little bit is the fact that there was a turn 1 crit on the Blissey, which I think might have mattered more than it initially looked like it would. Because the Blissey, I think, probably, if it was at 70% or so, it probably would have been saved by Trev and could have probably taken on the Cresselia 1v1 with Wish, Protect, and Toxic, and I think that might have mattered more than people would initially assume that it did. Other than that, it was a really good game, not much hacks involved, and I was very, very entertained when I was watching this, because I was actually managing to watch this live. One thing that I was a little bit confused by was the switch out into Shaman on the Garchomp when the Shaman was killed by the Earthquake, because I felt that Togekiss could have switched in at that point and not really risked that much. He hadn't gone for any Iron move, Iron Tail, Iron Head the previous couple times, and he could have saved the Shaman for later, but other than that, it was a really great game, and it should really be admired.
Yeah, I agree. I really did enjoy this game, and that was a good point about the early on crit, because if that Blissey did have Toxic, then this could have definitely been a different outcome. Okay, so for the second game here on the weekly recap, we have the Phoenix Sunkerns, coached by Cheeseboy628, against the Oakland Rosa Raiders, coached by Richard O'Brien. And this was a fantastic match that I had the pleasure of watching live. So we'll get right into it. As the Rosa Raids leave with their Sableye and go right for the taunt on the Manaphy to prevent it from setting up a Tail Glow. As the Manaphy goes right for the Ice Beam, predicting maybe a Rosa Raid switch in. So here they go right for the Scald as the Roserade does come in, and they do get the burn. So that is definitely good for Cheese Boy because that's just weakening one of its the Manaphy's checks. So here Cheese Boy switches in his Bisharp onto the Roserade, and now this is a really, really big threat to the Rosa Raiders team. They really don't have good switch-ins to this thing. So Bisharp goes right for the Iron Head after taking a lot from that Hidden Power Fire and does knock it out with a crit. So that's kind of unfortunate for the Rosa Raiders, but they send in their Lopunny, which can easily revenge the Bisharp. So here, with the Lopunny, they go right for the Power Up Punch because that would have knocked out the Bisharp, and it could really make Lopunny a threat to anything that wants to come in. So here, the Phoenix Sun Current send in their Diancie to take on the Lopunny. Looks like it's physically defensive the way it took that power-up punch and just decides to fire off a Moonblast onto the Florges. Now, the Sun Current set up their Stealth Rocks, and the Diancie can easily take hits from this Florges, but doesn't look like it can do anything back. So he decides to go into his Gengar to take on the Florges. Now, this could really, really threaten it with a powerful Sludge Wave and such, but he actually decides to go for the Destiny Bond, maybe predicting a Psychic on the Florges because it does learn Psychic. So the Florges actually just goes right for a Synthesis and now switches out. And the Phoenix Sun Currents go right for a Sludge Bomb and do get the poison on the Mamoswine while doing nearly half with that Sludge Bomb. Just to goes to show how strong Gengar is. And then goes for another Sludge Bomb right there. I guess the Rosa Raiders didn't put Ice Shard on their Mamoswine because they just decided not to go for it there. So here comes the Lopunny to revenge the Gengar and knocks him right out with frustration. As the Sun Current go right back into their Thundurus and go right for the Thunder Wave on the Lopunny. And unfortunately, the Lopunny does get paralyzed, which will definitely come into play because damaging a Thundurus is always really, really important. So here comes the Florges. And I would imagine that this is going to be a Cleric with Heal Bell or Aromatherapy rather, because that is huge to keep the Lopunny healthy, as it does reveal the Aromatherapy after taking a knockoff from the Thundurus. So here, the Florges just stays in and goes right for the Moonblast, right onto the Medicham, and knocks it out in one shot. So I guess Cheese Boy thought that maybe he would go for a Synthesis or switch out or something like that. But he actually gets hit right by that Moonblast. So here, the floor just goes for the Giga Drain on the Tail Glow of the Manaphy, knowing that it could take a +3 Scald, as long as it's not a crit, and maybe even if it is a crit. Yeah, if it is a crit, it still would have been able to take it. It goes for another Giga Drain, knocking the Manaphy all the way down to 31%. So it will be able to be revenged by something like Lopunny or Latios when those decide to come in. So here, the Rosa Raiders sack their Sableye, knowing that it's probably the least useful in this match, as Manaphy just knocks it out with Scald. And now they can bring in their Lopunny right in and just knock it out with a Frustration. But instead of sacking Manaphy, the Phoenix Sun Current decides to send in their Bisharp to take the hit. Bisharp goes straight down, and this Lopunny is in here looking pretty solid. As the Diancie comes down, we know that it cannot knock out the Diancie, even with a high jump kick from this range, not even close. So Cheese Boy makes a good prediction here and goes for the Diamond Storm, predicting the switch. Moonblast would not have been able to kill the Florges, and he would have been able to get off a move or a hit on the Diancie. So here comes the Latios, as Cheese Boy makes another good prediction, expecting the Earthquake, switching right into Thundurus. So here, the Thundurus goes for the knockoff, but Latios is actually a Cobra Berry, and it's a physical set. Goes right for the Dragon Claw and does over half to the Thundurus. But unfortunately for the Rosa Raiders here, they do get paralyzed, and they get fully paralyzed once again, allowing this Thundurus to live this next hit, and being able to knock out the Latios really low, while the Latios did get a high roll on the Dragon Claw there, meaning that if he didn't get paralyzed, he would have been able to knock out the Thundurus had he got the same roll. And down goes the Latios. So now the Lopunny could come right in and revenge the Thundurus, but it is not going to be able to knock out the Diancie from the range that it's at. So it looks like the Phoenix Sun Current are going to be able to take the pretty narrow 2-0 victory over the Oakland Rosa Raiders. So overall, a close and competitive game. Wow, the Lopunny was actually able to live a Moonblast from Diancie. That's pretty interesting. I thought that would have knocked it out from the range he was at, but nope, it was not able. So here, that is the end of the game. And what are your comments on that, Cam?
I thought that was a very good game, and I was really impressed by Cheese Boy's preparation in this game. I think that was Assault vs Bisharp because I have a feeling that was Hidden Power fighting on Rosa Raid, and I think that that's a sign of good preparation on his part, just having something to take it on 100%. I felt that the paralysis was very annoying to watch just as a spectator, but obviously it always will be. And I think that the saving the mana fee was very interesting and showed a lot of experience with the format, that he knew that he could use it again later if everything was paralyzed as the threatening thing that it is. And yeah, I thought that was a very good game between two very good opponents.
Yep, I agree. I think that Cheese Boy did prepare very well and played very well as well, and the Rose Raiders did too. A couple paralyses did not help them there, but I think that doesn't really take
They
away.
made the most of what they had.
They did make the most of what
in
they
my
had.
opinion. Yes,
Exactly.
they got unlucky, but they did try and play around it and nearly succeeded as well. One thing I was confused by was the Destiny Bond from Gengar
Yep.
on the Forges.
Yep.
I know that he might have been predicting Psychic, but Sludge Wave I felt would have been a safer option there, honestly, because even if the Gengar did go down to the Psychic, it was guaranteed damage on the Forges, and if anything wanted to switch in, like the Mamoswine did the next turn. Speaking on the Mamoswine switch in, while the poison from Sludge Bomb was annoying, if he was Sludge Wave, it would have 2-hit KO'd anyway, and it looked to be a roll as it was, so I don't really think that the poison mattered too much. Yeah, I just thought that was a good game between two very good opponents.
Yep. Definitely agreed there. I think that they both played well and both prepped well, and it was a fast-paced, pretty offensive game, which is always more fun to watch, in my opinion.
I was very I was smiling at seeing the Dragon Dance Latios.
Me too. That was cool.
I know that he's been wanting to use it in a game this season, and I was just pleased that he actually did.
Same.
And the next game this week is between the Toronto Raptors and the New York Metangs. The Toronto Raptors are, of course, coached by the token minorities member Jolt, while the New York Metangs are coached by Taft. Now, looking at team preview, I was when I was first watching this, I actually did think that there was a slight advantage to Taft. Just from a personal standpoint, I didn't know the results or anything. Just in terms of Victini is obviously impossible to wall, just in theory. It's different in practice when you know all of its moves, but given everything it could be running, it could really be difficult to deal with. I thought that the Toxicroak was going to put in a fair amount of work this game. I thought that he had the physically defensive mons he needed to take on Talonflame. I did think that at the beginning that Taft did have an advantage in this game. Did you have anything similar, or were you the complete opposite?
No, I was pretty close. I was looking at both teams, and I knew that Jolt's amount of priority, like his Pokemon have a lot of priority. For example, Talonflame, Lucario, and Breloom.
Talonflame, Lucario, Breloom, yeah.
Which could all come in handy against some of these more offensively inclined Pokemon. But at this, on the same token, things like Hoopa, things like Victini are really, really hard for Jolt to, just flat out wall. So I did think that if Taft played his cards right and the New York Metangs, executed properly with wall breakers like Victini and Hoopa, then things like Suicune, things like Cobalion and Toxicroak could put in a lot of work and help him clean up. So I thought this would be a pretty somewhat even match based on the team preview.
And one thing I didn't even mention, I did think that Suicune had a lot of potential this game because its only real check was Breloom, and he did have, I think, 3 possible switch-ins to Breloom just as pivots.
Yep.
Although admittedly calling Hooper a switch into Breloom is probably being a little bit facetious on my part. But Victini and Toxicroak could both deal with Breloom, and yeah, I did think that Taft had the definite matchup advantage.
Yep.
So turn 1, we see Jirachi versus Victini, Battle of the Pixies, and the red Pixie reveals its choice Scarf and goes straight for a final gambit, taking out the Jirachi. And then turn 2, it's 5v5, obviously, and we see Breloom versus the Donphan. Braylon does manage to Bullet Seed on the switch into Toxicroak, doing a respectable amount of damage to it, leaving it just over 45%, as the Lucario switches in rather intelligently on a gunk shot, and here we see that this Lucario is actually special. And this is after he brought Choice Band Lucario last week, so I thought that was really good preparation on Jolt's part. We then see the Aura Sphere instead of the Focus Blast because everyone misses, and we see Gunk Shots used by Donphan on the Lucario, predicting the switch out into something like Breloom. We see Gunk Shot again doing just over 30% to the Lati as Hooper switches in on the Latios as it goes straight for a substitute. And here we see that the Hooper is actually Choice Scarf, unless Jolt is for whatever reason using negative speed IVs and everything. So that's interesting, and it allows Jolt to play around it a lot easier. He goes out into Clefable and sets up a Cosmic Power, and for those who watch my channel, you know that I really dislike Cosmic Power just as a move, and to see Jolt using Cosmic Power hurts a little bit, but it worked really well for him last season, and he just continues setting up the Cosmic Power on the Donphan, going for the Gunk Shots, as it's doing a little bit over 50%. He does Poison on turn 12, manages to get the Poison on Clefable, but this is Magic Guard Clefable, so obviously that doesn't matter that much. He goes for another Cosmic Power as he switches into the Cobalion, which reveals Calm Mind instead of Iron Head, which I thought it would have been for a moment. And Stored Power does almost nothing, but seeing that this is a Calm Mind Cobalion, Joel feels pretty comfortable just Calm Minding up himself. He's already got a lead in the boost race with his Spadef, and every boost he has also significantly increases his damage output with the Stored Power. And when Jolt gets up to plus 5 Spadef and plus 3 in the defense and special attack, he does go for the Stored Power on the Cobalion as it goes for Flash Cannon and narrowly avoids the 2-hit KO as he manages to softball up to above 70%, which is the approximate 2-hit KO range, and goes for another Calm Mind, just trying to increase his damage output a little bit more. He risked the crit, but Taft didn't manage to get it. He softballs up with Clefable and clicks Stored Power on another Flash Cannon. The Hooper does come out and takes the Stored Power really well. It does resist it, and it's got a huge amount of Spadef, but it doesn't manage to 2-hit KO with Psyshock. And Jolt does just go for the softball, bring his Clefable back up, and he manages to kill the Donphan as it switches in after he's gone for another Cosmic Power just to boost up his defense even more, boost up his damage output entirely. Stored Power takes out the Donphan and will take out the Hooper as well, at the cost of Clefable, because the Hooper does reveal that it is Scarf Destiny Bond, and so yeah, it's Latios versus Calm Mind Suicune, and Latios steps up a substitute and then goes for his own Calm Mind, and eventually in the 1v1, Latios does manage to kill it manages to lower the Suicune to the range where Choice Band Talonflame manages to revenge kill it. So I thought that given that I had given the edge to Taft in the pregame, I was really impressed by not just how Joel played in this game, but also the extent of his preparation that I overlooked. The possibility of him being Special Lucario, the possibility of him being Sub-CM, Mega Latios. I was just really impressed by almost everything in that game that Joel did. I think he played a near enough perfect game. And I don't think Taft really had any huge misplays. I just think that the momentum slightly favoured Jolt after the turn 1 final gambit with Victini. I think that the V-Create would have been a smarter play on that turn, given the Jirachi, it does die to V-Create, but he was probably predicting the Latios or the Clefable to switch in to try and tank it. Other than that, I think that was a really good game and just shows how threatening Jolt is as a battler in this draft format, because yeah, I gave the edge to Taft in this game at team preview, and he lost fairly convincingly at the end.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said there. I think that Jolt really prepared phenomenally, and he played out of his mind. He really did a fantastic job. While Tef did prepare pretty well too, I just do not. Well, first of all, one thing I didn't like about his preparation was the Combine Kabbalion. Not to say that it couldn't have put in work, but that is not really a safe check to Combine Clefable because, or even Cosmic Power Clefable. Whatever it is, uh, a Swords Dancing set or some type of physically attack boosting set would be much better because to have Iron Head, where you have a decent chance of flinching the Clefable, is just absolutely huge. With the Flash Cannon boosts, Flash Cannon boosting, alongside an already boosted up Clefable is not going to, get him really anywhere.
Much, yeah.
And exactly, it's not going to do too much. And then the Flash Cannon's chances of lowering special defense are also really low. It's only 10%, so it's going to be really hard for him to get lucky there and be able to check the Clefable that way. So I would have definitely suggested maybe just running Iron Head in general, at least Iron Head, but I think, some type of boosting move to boost faster than the Clefable, like Swords Dance or something, would have been a good idea.
I agree. I think Swords Dance would have been the superior option in this game, not just for the Clefable, but also if you're looking at his team, the potential for Spadef Talonflame, the potential, the fact that Megalatios is bulkier on its special side than its physical side. Jirachi isn't really going to take that much from a Carmine Kabbalion unless there's a move that I'm forgetting. Brailium is obviously not going to take a hit, but it can revenge kill with Mark Punch, and Lucario. Lucario is an exception, I guess. I do feel that Swords Dance would have been the superior option in this matchup, but he did decide to bring Carmine Kabbalion. I do think that was a slight, not misplay, mispreparation on his part, but other than that, this was a really good game, really good preparation from both players, because while the Carmine wasn't the best option, the rest of his preparation I thought was pretty good. The Scarf Hooper to handle the Latios if it got out of bounds, the gunk shot on the Donphan as well. I just think there were a couple tiny mistakes that he made that Jolt managed to capitalize on brilliantly.
Exactly. I think the not going for V-Create turn 1 definitely was perplexing to me because the only possible switch-in that Jolt had that could avoid a 2-hit KO from even a Scarf TD's V-Create is the Latios, and it's not like he does have great Latios switch-ins, but he does have things that could keep it in check pretty easily, like the Scarf Hoopa. So he really just didn't lose much by going for that V-Create there, and the Victini really could have came in handy throughout, later in the match, because as long as he was able to deal with the Latios, then the Victini could have put in a lot of work, because if he did, have HP investment, Final Gambit could have put in a lot of work later if he didn't take any damage. V-Create, once Latios is weakened or knocked out, just, runs rampant on his team, especially because he has Choice Band and Talonflame. So I think that, I see why maybe he would have gone for the Final Gambit, hoping that maybe the Latios would switch it and he could take it out quickly, but I just think that it wasn't the greatest play.
I understand why he did it, and I think if it had worked, it would have been really good, but I think that the risk was higher that turn than I think he realized.
Yep.
The reward was obviously pretty big, but losing Victini if he still had Latios around, because Jirachi wasn't honestly that useful this matchup, in my opinion.
Agreed.
It had the Donphan, it had the Suicune. I mean, Suicune isn't a fantastic Jirachi check, but I do feel like V-Create was a smarter play in that. But that's just one misplay, and it might have ended up costing him the game, but it was definitely well played aside from that.
That's true. Okay, I guess we'll move on to the next one then. Okay, guys, we have, for our next game, the Montreal Kabbalions, coached by Dave Fernie, against the Washington Charizards, coached by Slick Rick Nixon. You could just call him Nixon. And this was definitely a very interesting game. Anything you want to say about the team matchup, Palm?
From the matchup, I was thinking that Nixon did have an advantage. Although I was looking forward to seeing how he was going to play around Weavile, because obviously his only check is Scizor, and it can kind of revenge kill the rest of his team aside from the Aerodactyl, which obviously outspeeds it, but with some damage on it, like Ice Shard. And I was looking forward to seeing he was going to try and play around that Weavile, but at the same time, outside of Weavile, he had a really good matchup, and if he could play well in that against that one particular Mon, I did think he had an edge.
Yep, I do agree because Weavile just runs rampant on Nixon's team, and he did have things like Keldeo and Charizard, which are fantastic Scizor checks. So if he could keep those healthy, then Weavile should be able to put in a lot of work. So this should be a pretty interesting one. So we get right into it. The Cobalions lead with Keldeo as Nixon, and the Charizard's lead with Slowking. So that is a very good matchup for Nixon, as the Cobalions switch out into their Mandibuzz here, and Nixon makes a good play going right for the Thunder Wave, paralyzing the Mandibuzz, which is a very important Pokemon for the Cobalions team. So here they go right for a knockoff onto the Slowking, knocking off the leftovers, as Nixon reveals the Power Gem, which is probably for the Charizard. So here comes the Scizor, as the Mandibuzz goes for the Foul Play. So carrying knockoff and Foul Play, that's pretty interesting, as that does a pretty big chunk to the Scizor, 41%. So the Keldeo comes in on the Scizor now, as Scizor goes right for the Roost. And then he decides to switch out and go right into his Slowking on the Keldeo. Definitely a good play there, because Slowking walls the Keldeo, even if it's running something like HP Electric. So here the Keldeo decides to go for another Scald, predicting the switch, as the Goodra actually comes in. And the Goodra takes that ridiculously well. That's probably an Assault Vest Goodra, because the Scald only did around 8%. So here Goodra goes for a Dragon Pulse. And it does a pretty decent chunk to the Mandibuzz, but there's a good chance that Mandibuzz is probably specially defensive the way it's taking these hits, or has at least some special investment, because it only took 40% from what I believe to be a modest Goodra's Thunderbolt. So here, he goes right for the knockoff on the Goodra and knocks off the Assault Vest. So that probably is an Assault Vest modest Goodra. I don't know the exact investment, but here, the Cobalions make a shaky play, because they go right into their Gligar, which is a really important Pokemon to their team. But it really wasn't worth the risk of the Goodra having Ice Beam. And it does get Ice Beam and then goes right down. So here he goes into his Nidoking to revenge the Goodra and goes right for the Ice Punch on the Slowking. So here, he goes right into his Mandibuzz. And I believe he makes somewhat of a shaky play here now. I don't think he goes for the Roost here, which I think he switches out. Okay, that's a different situation. So here comes the Nidoking, and Nixon predicts the Nidoking to switch out from the Mandibuzz, or something else to come back in on the Aerodactyl. And here, the Mandibuzz goes for the Toxic instead of going for the Roost on the Slowking. So now he's in range of another Power Gem. So this was just not the best, series of plays on the Cobalions' part. So Nixon is able to knock out the Mandibuzz with a Slowking and only get poisoned in, the trade-off. So not too bad there, because he knocked out two pretty big threats to his team. So here, Dave makes a very good play, and the Cobalions pursuit the Slowking, knocking out the Charizard's first Pokemon. So here comes the Mega Scizor, obviously enough, and here they go right for the U-turn on the incoming Charizard. So Dave sends in his Charizard, which has to be a Mega Charizard X and not Charizard Y, and he decides to switch out because he does not want to take a Stone Edge from the Aerodactyl, but the Aerodactyl does miss the Stone Edge on the incoming Keldeo. So here on the Keldeo switch in, Nixon decides to go into his Goodra and take the Icy Wind. So he takes that fairly well, but he's not able to live the Secret Sword from there. So Keldeo gets a KO on the Goodra, and here comes the Torn. So the Hurricane misses, and Nixon's already 0 for 2 on 2 of his inaccurate moves. So Keldeo goes for the Icy Wind and knocks the Torn down a fair amount, and then goes for the Scald on the Scizor switch in. So he does not get in the burn, but he's still in a pretty good spot, because this Keldeo walls Scizor pretty well. And Nixon decides to go right for the U-turn and go into his Tornadus again to go for Hurricane, only to miss one more time. So here, the Cobalions go for Icy Wind with their Keldeo and knock the Tornadus into Scald range, but he decides to switch out and go into his Tangrowth. So Tangrowth comes in, takes a really good chunk from that Scald, meaning that he's not Assault Vest Tangrowth. And here comes the Nidoking on the Tangrowth. So that Giga Drain does a really healthy chunk to the Nidoking, but the Nidoking is able to easily knock it out with Sludge Wave. Nixon didn't really have a switch in. Scizor is almost knocked out, and this Tornadus is not Assault Vested. So the Tornadus goes for the Hurricane on the Nidoking, which definitely would have knocked it out from there, but he misses the Hurricane again, which is really unfortunate for him because now he really does not have much of a way of coming back. The Aerodactyl reveals that it is Life Orb, which means that he would not be able to knock out the Keldeo. He won't be able. Life Orb didn't really make a difference there, but he's not really able to knock out the Keldeo with the Earthquake, and the Scald is able to knock it out, and Skull will be able to knock out the Scizor here, giving the Montreal Cobalions the 3-0 victory over the Washington Charizards. Now, I know that looked ridiculously hacksy and looked like that was the only reason they've won, but I don't know, what would have happened if one of those Hurricanes hit, but if all those Hurricanes hit, but he did have the Cobra Berry on the Keldeo, so, the fact that he
won, definitely.
yeah, no, he, it probably did change the outcome big time, but the Cobra Berry could have come in handy. Hurricane isn't a very accurate move, so if he missed one of those Hurricanes, then I still think Dave could have had the chance to win, but it still really mattered a lot.
It sucked that he missed almost all of his inaccurate moves. I think he did, in fact, miss all of his every move that wasn't 100%. Like, he missed Stone Edge, he missed 2 Hurricanes.
3 Hurricanes.
Yeah, 3 Hurricanes. I miscounted.
Yep.
So obviously Hax was a little bit annoying in that regard, but I do think that he could have prepared a little better as well, because, as I did say, the Weavile was such a huge threat. I was expecting stuff like maybe Colberberry on Slowking. I was expecting possibly a Scarf, Tornadoes, just to try and revenge kill it, or pick up a surprise kill. I feel like the Weavile was such a huge threat that wasn't necessarily properly accounted for, considering how strong the Montreal Cobalions checks to the Scizor are in Keldeo and Charizard, which are, I think they're 2 of the sturdiest Scizor checks there are. But aside from the lack of Colberberry on Slowking, I don't really know anything he could have done specifically to make him less Weavile weak, because Weavile is just such a strong and terrifying Monteface. I do disagree with the wanting to, but with staying in on Keldeo that many times against the Tornadoes.
Yep.
Admittedly, it worked out for him because Hurricane missed so many times, but if the Aerodactyl did have a flying type move, which it ends up not having, but the Colberberry would have been burnt if he got hit by even one of them, and that could have been really important in the outcome of the game, because if it did have the Colberberry, it would have killed and the Colberberry was burnt, and the Aerodactyl had a flying move, which is admittedly all a few ifs, but if that all was the case, Aerodactyl won, and I feel like he played unnecessarily risky with that.
Definitely.
I suppose I shot Weavile, but yeah, I just felt it was unnecessarily risky.
Yep, I think that he thought that he, was safe because he had that Cobra Berry to the point where he could, shock him and surprise him and, pull off something big, but...
it would have won the turn, it wouldn't have won the game.
Exactly.
And that's the big issue.
Exactly. I think that, Dave should have thought a little bit more long-term in those situations, but overall, he did prepare well, and he started playing better towards the end of the game, so, I do think that... if say 2 out of those 3 Hurricanes hit, if all 3 hit, I think that Nixon definitely had a good chance at winning, a really good chance at winning. But if 2 hit, I still think that it could have gone either way. This is just me speculating.
It would have come down to who played it better.
Exactly.
It would have come down to who played it better.
Exactly. All right. So that was definitely an interesting game. Definitely sorry about the hacks to Nixon, but that's Pokemon. So on that note, we will move on to the next one.
So the next game this week was the St. Louis Reshiram versus the Colorado Avalugs, and we are fortunate to have the St. Louis Reshiram coach with us for this weekly recap, so I'll be sure to get his thoughts after the game. Team matchup, I was thinking that this was probably in the favour of the Avalugs, personally. Just, there are a ton of threats that they have. The Mew doesn't have any particularly great answers at team preview. The Altaria looks pretty threatening. The Hooper obviously has no switch-ins. And the Klefki, especially with Spike Stack, the amount of switches he can force and the fact that he only has one Flying Mon once the Gyarados is Mega Evolved, I did think that the matchup was probably in the Avalugs' favour. So, Jumping into the game, we saw Tyranitar lead from the Reshirams against the Landorus Therian lead from the Avalugs, who go for a U-turn, turn 1, as it does a huge chunk to that Tyranitar. So that leaves the probability that it is a Choice Scarf Tyranitar. The Rotom then comes out and goes for Volt Switch, as we see that the Tyranitar has Stealth Rock. So instead of being Choice Scarf, it's actually got a fair amount of investment in its attacks and its speed as opposed to its bulk. The Amoonguss switches in on the Klefki and manages to get off a Spore on the Klefki as the Klefki layers a Spike on the field. Now, while the Spike is annoying, the Klefki was important to just get off priority Thunder Wave versus everything. And both players switch out Matty into his Infernape and the Avalugs into their Mew. Now, obviously, he doesn't want to stay in on the Mew in case it goes for Thunder Wave, as he switches out into a Salamence, and the Avalugs predict that nicely. They go for Will-O-Wisp on the Salamence switch, as the Salamence actually reveals Toxic, the Mew answers. It tries to go for what it thinks is a free defog, and that Mew is now fairly crippled, and he's forced out into his Klefki, which obviously can't do too much, but it's not going to take anything from a burnt Salamance's attacks. As the Salamence reveals that it's a Wish, so a Wish-passing Salamence, as it brings the Infernape back up to full from the Spike that it had taken earlier. The Infernape switches out of the Rotom Wash into the Amoonguss because the Amoonguss doesn't care at all, versus the Rotom doesn't care about anything it could do, and just fires off a nice free Giga Drain on the Mew switch, which brings it back up to about 90%. The Black Sludge means it's at 97, so he stays in knowing that he can take anything. The Side Shot does 40% to the Amoonguss as it goes for another Giga Drain, and now he can just switch out the Amoonguss and get it back up to full HP without too much hassle. And the Avalog switch out into their Hooper against Tyranitar. We know that the Tyranitar is not Choice Scarf because we saw it lay Stealth Rock earlier, so this Hooper is basically getting a kill here as it goes for the Hyperspace Fury on the defensive Salamence, and after the burn and sand damage, Salamence just gets knocked out because Hooper is unbelievably strong. And in comes Stoutland after the Salamence goes down and kills the Hooper, which stayed in thinking that the Stoutland was going to go for Pursuit that turn. It cost him the Hooper, but it was a fair play all in all. The Landorus Terrian comes out, getting the Intimidate off on the Stoutland so that it can live any hit, goes for U-turn, and goes out into Altaria. Now, there was a little bit of mix-up this week, and the Altaria didn't Mega Evolve immediately, but it was fixed pretty easily just by staying in, going for Roost the next turn, and going for the same move so that it took the same net damage. And it didn't end up affecting game at all. It was just something one of the players forgot about, which anyone can do. Now, the Altaria then switches out because it can't do anything to the Amoonguss. The Klefki comes in. It's still asleep, but that won't be lasting too much longer. We do know that it has burnt one turn of sleep already, as he switches into the Rotom on the Infernape's close combat, and we see that the close combat looks to be a 2-hit KO, which is not good for the Rotom. So he switches out into his Landorus on the Infernape and takes a Hidden Power Ice, doing a clean 97%, leaving it in range for Mach Punch to just pick it off and give Infernape the kill. A very nice prediction there from Matty's part. So now we see Infernape versus Klefki, and the Infernape reveals it probably doesn't have a Fire type move because it goes for close combat on the Klefki. It's still doing a good 40% to the Klefki every turn, which means that in exchange for being T-Waved, the Klefki is now at 30%, give or take 1 or 2%, because Showdown is obviously very buggy with its displays of HP, and the Amoonguss switches in on the Klefki going for another layer of Spike. Now, Matty then doubles into Gyarados, predicting the switch out into something that could take on Amoonguss better, and the Gyarados gets T-Wave from the Klefki. The Klefki then sets up a Reflect on the Gyarados' Earthquake, meaning that the Gyarados is a little bit... It's not going to be doing that much damage to the rest of his team after the Klefki goes down, doing a 37% with Dazzling Gleam in the process. He actually doesn't go down that turn, he goes down the next turn, and the Gyarados is left at 24%, not enough to take any hit, as the Gyarados had Dragon Dance trying to set up on the Klefki that he thought couldn't really touch it, leaving it revenged by the Rotom, and giving the Mew a free switch in to try and just annoy the rest of his team with status conditions, Will-O-Wisp, and all that good stuff. The Will-O-Wisp does burn the Tyranitar at the cost of the Mew, as the Tyranitar actually reveals that it's got Dark Pulse, so very heavily specially inclined Ice Beam and Dark Pulse on the same set, as it switches out on the Rotom into the Infernape, just sacking off the Infernape, getting free switch into Stoutland to kill the Rotom with Return, and then 2-hit KO the Altaria with Return. As Altaria goes for Cotton Guards, it didn't really matter, it couldn't have knocked out the Stoutland anyway, and it couldn't roost off the damage from Choice Band's Return. So yeah, all in all, a very well played game by Matty, as he picks up the 3-0 win against the Colorado Avalanche. What were your thoughts during the game?
I mentioned this in my commentary for the actual game. Fogg's team looks like an OU team. It is just so ridiculously good and threatening that it was almost to the point where, not to say that he didn't prepare, I'm sure he prepared, very well, and he did, because this was a very tough match, but he didn't even really have to prepare. He just could have brought, these 6 or, some of his other really threatening Pokemon and still had a really good chance of beating me. So I just knew that my plan was to overwhelm him with some, pretty threatening offense and just not let things like Mew and Altaria get a lot of momentum by either setting up or crippling the rest of my Pokemon. I knew that I had to kind of prevent those things from doing that, and if I could, I knew I could have had a chance of winning with, by breaking some of his walls down with Infernape and possibly cleaning up with Stoutland. So I was just really, really glad and felt really fortunate that I was able to get out of that, with the win, because, trying to prepare for him was nearly impossible, and I just hope I don't have to play him again, because that was a real tough one.
Yeah, I did mention that the matchup looks heavily in his favour, but I'm very impressed by the way that you managed to play that out. The prediction on the Landorus, on the Rotom, predicting Landorus switching, my apologies, with your Infernape was, in my opinion, very, very respectable, and yeah, I thought that was a pretty good game. I think the Cotton Guard Altaria choice was a little bit weird. I look at your team and I don't really see that much for especially offensive Altaria, stuff like that. But other than that, yeah, just a good game and good preparation from pretty much both players. The Salamence was something I was very excited to see, and I just think it came down to who played a little bit better, and the edge went to you in that.
Oof, yeah, that was tough.
So let's move on to our next game.
Alright, everyone, the last game that we have here on the weekly recap is between Manaphy City and their coach Cameron against the San Antonio Swamperts and their coach Dallas Boy 1992. Now, both of these teams look extremely threatening, with possessing both really strong offensive presence and defensive presence at the same time. And looking at the team, I would say that Manaphy City probably has somewhat of a team matchup advantage, because things like Darmanitan, Pinsir, and even the Sylveon to some extent, if it's offensive, could really chew up the Swampert's team. But what do you think, Palm?
Yeah, I do agree with the majority of that, and I think that I think that it looks like he prepared very well for the Gothitelle as well. Not having everything either has U-turn or just destroys the Gothitelle, or Baton Pass. He only really has 2 targets, and they're not the ones that he needs the most to beat the Swampert's team. I'm quite interested in seeing how the Swamperts play around the Pinsir, though.
Right. Right.
because Rotom H is the only thing that can really take 2 hits from a pincer, and that is not a pincer jack.
Yep.
Especially if it's sword stance with close combats. Yeah, I would say that the pincer on its own just looks so threatening. But at the same time, the Dragonite only really has the potentially scarfed Hydreigon and the Sylveon as its checks, and I think it can get around them with, well, multi-scale and coverage moves, really.
That's true.
So I think both players have chances to win, and it's down to who plays better with them.
Yep.
But I would probably give the slight edge to the Manaphy City.
Agreed. Agreed. So we'll get right into this battle and see what actually happens. So, as you can see here, Manaphy City leads off with their Hydreigon, as the Swamperts lead off with Rotom Heat. Now, the Swamperts switch out right into Conkeldurr, and they take a Dark Pulse, and that does nothing, revealing that Conkeldurr is probably Assault Vest. But it could also mean that this Hydreigon might not be the most offensive set, 'cause that really did very little. So the Sylveon comes in, takes a Fire Punch fairly well, as the Conkeldurr switches out and goes into Rotom Heat. Could take any hit from Sylveon, pretty easily. The Hyper Voice does not do too much, and it's actually revealed here that the Rotom does not have leftovers, which is interesting. So here comes the Hydreigon to take on the Rotom, and that takes very, very little from the Volt Switch, considering that the Rotom might be offensive because it doesn't have leftovers. So this Hydreigon actually reveals that it does have leftovers, so it could be a bulkier set. So the Conkeldurr comes in, and this thing is a huge threat. So the Conkeldurr goes right for the knockoff, as the Cobra Berry Starmie comes in. So now right here, Starmie goes right for the recover as the Gothitelle comes in. And here is why Dallas Boy, the coach of the Swamperts, thinks that Gothitelle should definitely be abandoned in League format. And he does a good job at demonstrating here why this might be true. So here we're going to skip a lot of turns. I believe turn 36 might be where all this craziness ends. Because this went on for a long time, this type of stall war, to the point where Gothitelle could stall out the Skulls of Starmie and then trick the Choice Scarf back to itself and have the Starmie struggle to death. So very well executed on the Swamperts' part. So now it's a 6-5 game in the Swamperts' favor as Hydreigon comes in on the Gothitelle. And here the Swamperts make a misclick and they go right into Dragonite to take a Draco Meteor from the Hydreigon. Now there was a really good chance that that was a misclick because there's really no reason Conkeldurr couldn't have just come in there. So I think that Dallas did make that mistake. He didn't really intend to do that.
A genuine mistake. It was just a misclick.
Exactly. So here comes the Rotom Heat to take on the Sylveon, which was the Dragonite switch in. And the Sylveon here reveals the Protect, as the Rotom Heat goes for the Volt Switch again. Now, Sylveon knows that it can take a Volt Switch pretty well, so if he wants, he could stay in. But the Rotom actually reveals that it is not choiced, and it goes right for the Pain Split. So Sylveon reveals the Baton Pass here and goes right into Hydreigon, because here it could fire off a move. Conkeldurr could easily come in and take it, but whittling down the Conkeldurr is certainly nice, because limiting the amount of times it could switch in could really allow Hydreigon to put in some work. So here Dallas makes a nice double switch and goes into Landorus on the Sylveon, and I believe he is going to be packing the Sludge Wave. So Skarmory comes in on Manaphy City, and Sludge Wave does go off and does not affect the Skarmory. So very good prediction on Cam and Manaphy City's part. So the Skarmory gets up its Stealth Rocks as the Rotom Heat comes in. Now Rotom Heat could just click Volt Switch here, and it does. So the Hydreigon comes in, takes that very easily again, and we're kind of going into a loop here. The Conkeldurr keeps coming in every time the Hydreigon comes in, and is pretty free to fire off knockoffs or Fire Punches, even Drain Punch. So here, Manaphy City makes another good prediction, goes for the Draco Meteor to get some pretty solid damage off on that Conkeldurr, as Conkeldurr predicts and goes for the knockoff rather than a Drain Punch or anything. So here he goes for the Drain Punch on the Sylveon, but does not get much HP back. It is only at 47%, where the Sylveon could just fire off a Hyper Voice or do something else pretty freely, knowing that the Conkeldurr has been whittled a good amount. So here he goes for the Wish as the Rotom Heat comes in, because now he could either Baton Pass the next turn, he could fire off a Hyper Voice to get back to full HP. He's in a pretty good spot. So the Gothitelle comes in, and the Sylveon does go for the Baton Pass here. So Darmanitan comes in, and the Gothitelle actually reveals the Thunder Wave. So that was not a Choice Scarf Darmanitan. I believe that's a Life Orb Darmanitan, and the fact that it is crippled that way is pretty unfortunate, because this thing really just could have destroyed the Swamperts if it had not gotten paralyzed. So here comes the Blastoise, and it goes for the Rapid Spin, which is big because the Rotom Heat and the Dragonite do not like taking those Stealth Rocks on the switch-in. So here, the Blastoise goes for Scald and burns the Sylveon, and Manaphy City goes for the Wish to try to get some HP back on the Sylveon. I don't think he's going to want a Baton Pass here because the Sylveon is getting whittled, so he goes for the Protect as the Swampers go right into Landorus. Good play there. But now they have to decide whether they want to try to threaten the Skarmory or go for the Sludge Wave on the Sylveon. So here, the Skarmory does come out again, and the Swampers make a good play by going into the Rotom Heat. So here, I would imagine they would go for the Volt Switch, and that is what they do. The Darmanitan comes in and takes a pretty healthy chunk, 36% from that Volt Switch. So here comes the Darmanitan, where the Conkeldurr could just come in and outspeed it because it is paralyzed and hit it with Drain Punch. I don't think the crit mattered because Darmanitan is actually very frail. So here comes the Pinsir, which is the biggest threat to the Swampert's team, arguably, and that return does 57.2% to a max HP Blastoise. So Blastoise is not a Pinsir check, and Pinsir is running rampant right now. So here comes the Rotom Heat, which is the only remaining Pinsir quote-unquote check, and decides to go for the Volt Switch again on the Hydreigon. So now we know the Conkeldurr is going to be coming back in, as it is at 79%, it could easily take a Draco Meteor and such. So here comes the Sylveon, as he actually goes for the Fire Punch, predicting the Sylveon, getting some good damage off on it, because with the Fire Punching and the Burn, he could definitely get some pretty decent damage off on the Sylveon and really whittle it down quite a bit. So here the Sylveon goes for the Wish, and now it's probably going to Protect, unless he makes a prediction and goes right for the Hyper Voice or something like that, as he actually does predict and go right for the Hyper Voice as the Dragonite comes in. So very good play on Manaphy City's part, because had he not done that, he would have lost to Sylveon, which is a pretty important member of his team. So, well, he wouldn't have lost it, but I mean, he would have given the Dragonite some momentum. So here the Skarmory comes in on the Landorus as Landorus goes for Rock Slide, and it looks like this Landorus may not have a move to really hit the Skarmory too hard. So here comes the Rotom Heat in on the Skarmory, and the Rotom Heat is probably just going to click a Volt Switch again, but no, it actually clicks Overheat and does nothing to the Hydreigon there. So it looks like the Swampers are sort of running out of options at this point. Here comes the Conkeldurr again on the Hydreigon as the Hydreigon goes for the Roost. Now this Hydreigon's perfectly healthy, and now I would imagine the Sylveon could come in and kind of just get sacked. So here comes the Fire Punch. He actually gets a crit, and this Sylveon is running really low at this point. He could go for a Wish, but with that Mach Punch, then if he did Wish here, he would go down the next turn. It would be a useless Wish. So he makes the better play and goes Hyper Voice and whittles down the Conkeldurr, which is the biggest remaining threat to the Manaphy City team. So here comes Pinsir, clicks Return, and the Conkeldurr drops. Now the Rotom Heat comes in, and I believe it can take a return from there. So Manaphy City just switches out into this Hydreigon, because here Hydreigon's just getting a KO with Draco Meteor, basically. I don't think Landorus is taking a hit, and I don't think Landorus really has a move to hit this Hydreigon either. So he actually misses the Draco, so that is kind of unfortunate, because now the Rotom is out of range of Draco Meteor, but he could just roost off because he is, a bulky Hydreigon here. So the Rotom Volt switches, and here comes the Landorus. But I don't think the Manaphy City really has to risk leaving Hydreigon in here, because Sludge Wave will do a good amount, even if he doesn't have Focus Blast. So it is revealed that he probably doesn't have Focus Blast, because he goes for the Sludge Wave here, and now he goes for Rock Polish, but it just doesn't look like he'll be able to break this Skarmory, as Manaphy City does go for the Whirlwind anyway, and the Landorus gets sent out. Rotom Heat comes in, and it's really getting whittled down with the Stealth Rocks. So here Rotom Heat goes for the Volt Switch, and the Landorus is going to come in again. Will it go for Volt Switch, though? I'm not sure. I just don't think it has anything to really hit the Skarmory at this point, so I think it's pretty safe to say that Manaphy City should have this in the bag. So Rock Slide can't flinch because the Landorus does have Sheer Force, which will not allow it to flinch, and he's able to get a Draco Meteor off with the Hydreigon, doing a lot of damage to this Landorus to the point where it cannot come in again with Stealth Rocks on the field. So here he goes for Rock Slide, and like I said, he cannot flinch, so it's not even like with a little bit of luck, you'd be able to pull this back. So here, the Rotom Heat comes in and goes for the Overheat, knocking out the Skarmory, but that Rotom is in range of an attack from Pinsir. So he could just click Return or Close Combat, whatever he may have, and he does have the Close Combat, so the Rotom goes right down, and the Landorus will go down upon switching. So a very close game, very good game, really, really well played on Manaphy City's part, well played on the Swampert's part as well. I just, that one misclick probably could have costed him a good amount, because the Dragonite was a big threat.
The misclick mattered a fair amount. But I did like the fact that Sylveon, having just gone for Wish and the protect being so obvious, he did make a play. He did manage to knock out the Dragonite before it managed to do anything to his team. So the Manaphy definitely played it well, especially after getting the Gothitelle, War lost with Starmie, because the Conkeldurr was at that point a pretty big threat to his team, and just preserving it and managing to pick up the kill, maximize its effectiveness. I was impressed by the way he played that, and all the games this week were very good, were very well played. Just that one misclick this game cost the Swamperts. We don't know what would have happened if the misclick hadn't happened, but we can't. Both players would have played differently. So yeah.
Exactly, and seeing how close it came down, I definitely do think that with had Dallas not making that play, then this game could have ended up differently. It could have ended up still really closely in Manaphy City's favor, because I think that Cam did a really good job at just playing it safe when he had to, and making sure that he didn't choke it away, and I think he did a very good job at that. But at the same on the same token, it did come down to be a close game. So with that Dragonite being around, maybe it could have been a different story. Who knows? We're not sure, and we'll never get to know. But just kudos to both coaches, because this was the game of the week, and they both played their hearts out and prepared very well. So it was definitely fun to watch.
Very fun to watch. Very well played by both coaches, and a deserving game of the week winner. So that's been all for the weekly recap. We'll see you next week, and Matty will be with me again that week, and then I think the week after you said that Dave is going to be back?
I believe so, yep.
Yeah, so until next week, see you.
Hope you guys enjoyed. Later.